Welcome to Terminal B's Bits and Bytes video series. We know IT can sometimes be a bit overwhelming and confusing, so we break things down into bite-sized bits and simplify IT for you. Hello everyone, welcome to another Terminal B's Bits and Bytes video, and today I am here with Randy Steinley. Randy is the CEO and co-founder of Cyber Trust Alliance, a 30-year technology veteran. Steinley has led multi-million-dollar organizations in higher education, manufacturing, IT services, and healthcare. He is passionate about providing affordable and achievable solutions for undeserved markets in the healthcare space. In his spare time, Steinley manages the global partnerships between Microsoft and the International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners, serving over 5,000 partners globally. He's also married to Beth, a professor and senior associate dean at the University of Texas at Austin, hook 'em horns, and the proud father of 4 grown children. Randy, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks, David. It's great to be with you and excited about the topic we're talking about.
Absolutely. And that topic today is practical things everyone needs to know about HIPAA. You know, there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lack of education on HIPAA. And the industry and many tend to overcomplicate it. And to be fair, it's a lot. But if we get down to brass tacks, there are some practical things that everyone needs to know about HIPAA if they are involved in the healthcare space. So I'm sure you're not going to disagree with that. You live and die with it. It's a lot, but we can break it down into some bite-sized chunks for everybody. But let's start at the top right now, Randy. What is the current landscape for HIPAA compliance?
Well, you and I have talked about this some, but what we find in the industry is it's there's so many people that either haven't started down that path or have just scratched the surface. And it's the things you just mentioned, right? It's a lot of information. There are a lot of moving parts. The solutions that we find in the marketplace generally tend to be very enterprise focused, right? So they're complicated, they're expensive, and most of healthcare is delivered by small and mid-sized practices, right? And
Mhm.
so that tends to be overwhelming, more money than they can spend, right? There's some do-it-yourself solutions out there, but it's, when I was younger and didn't have a complicated financial picture, I used TurboTax to do my taxes, right? And there's an awful lot of people trying to use do-it-yourself solutions around HIPAA compliance, and they're already spread thin, right? Everybody's wearing 52 different hats and trying to do the most with staffing shortages, and so there just really weren't a lot of good options out there for people, and so you wind up either spending more money than you have, or being overwhelmed and not really getting there, and so so it's rough. I mean, when you look at the federal government, they say based on the most recent proactive assessments they've done, that somewhere in the vicinity of 84% of healthcare fails to meet the minimum standards of HIPAA for one of
But
those reasons.
let me hop in here though. So that's nothing new, right? It's been that way. But recently, real recently, it feels like there's an extra crackdown looming. There's all kinds of, article, I already kind of knew this, but, getting prepared for this interview with you, with an expert on HIPAA compliance, I really dug into a lot and I was like, holy moly, what's going on? Because it feels like people are, I don't know why, first of all, let's validate this with you right now. Is there a crackdown looming more than 2, 5, 10 years ago? So let's talk about that, not to strike the fear of God into everybody on this, but kind of to do that, for everybody's own benefit, so they understand that they're not going to get all of a sudden, blindsided by this. So let's talk about that. Let's set the stage and then we can get into some practical things that people can do right away. But let's first talk about, what's going on in the space. What are you seeing and why do you think that's happening?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, there's been a step up in cracking down on this over the last few years, right? Starting, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, the federal government, right, specifically the Office of Civil Rights Division of Health and Human Services, who's responsible for HIPAA compliance, they started cracking down. And one of the big things was, hey, traditionally we've been focused on enterprise hospital systems. And a lot of the, as we mentioned, right, a lot of the healthcare that gets provided by those smaller practices and groups and clinics, it felt like they were being ignored when it came to compliance. And so one of the things the Fed said was no more, right? We're going to apply this across the board. So they started focusing more on smaller practices, or at least giving them equal attention. The other thing was they started cracking down on things like access to your records, right? Access to medical records is a right of every patient, right? And I need to be able to get access to those records when I want them, in the format I want them, in a reasonable amount of time. And so the Fed's really cracked down on that. And what that does, it seems like a small thing, but what that does is that gives them the ability to go investigate the compliance of any practice, anytime when there's a complaint
this
about
is a
that.
new, this is a relatively new happening.
It's a relatively new happening. 2 years ago, they had over a dozen enforcement actions just around that specifically. All right. And if they look into that, they can do an entire audit of all areas of HIPAA compliance across a practice. So this seemingly minute little issue allowed them to open, kind of open the investigation into all these different areas. So that was a new thing that they cracked down on, started cracking down on. The other thing is when you look at cyber insurance, right? Cyber insurance is a relatively new thing, right? Over the last 10, 15 years. But because there have been so many breaches in healthcare and they're so expensive, right? 3 times more than any other industry globally, a breach in healthcare is, cyber insurance is just getting pummeled, right? And they're having to write checks.
There you go. Follow the money.
Right.
And follow the money. So the reason for this extra scrutiny, again, we're talking about HIPAA. People have heard about HIPAA compliance since they started their practice, whenever HIPAA started, whenever, right? A long time
Yep.
ago. But there's so much more. And I guess the reason for, why we're talking about this, why, there's a lot of people saying we got to get HIPAA compliant is because there's been a lot of breaches. There's some big breaches. And then that shoots the insurance up the wazoo. And then the insurance people are tied to the legislation. Okay. So that's why. So now we understand. We're not just saying everyone be scared of HIPAA, everyone be scared of HIPAA, you're going to get popped. We're saying there's a reason you should be concerned about this now. And here is the reason.
50
Is
million
that a
records.
fair statement?
Yeah, 50 million records were breached last year.
Okay.
Over 50 million. And that's just big breaches of 500 records or more that were reported directly to the Office of Civil Rights. So that's conservative. And based on experts' projections, that costs at least $400 to $500 per record to the industry, right?
Oh my
So
goodness.
we're talking $25 billion that we lost in dealing with that last year in an industry that's struggling to, stay profitable and keep their head above water.
All right. One last fear mongering here. And again, I'm using that word, but I'm really just trying to drive home the attention to this matter. What kind of penalties are we looking at? And talk about penalties in a 1 to 10 size healthcare practice, 10 to 10, 50, 100, and then the big dogs. What should one expect if they don't get their stuff in order here?
So there's a couple of different sides to that. First is if you get investigated by the Office of Civil Rights, they can enforce penalties up to $1.2 million per incident, right? So that's the first part. Now they're pretty conservative with that because they don't want to penalize you. They want to work together with you. So that's just one piece of it, right? And when they happen, they can be enormous. Typically, that's if you're negligent or not willing to work together with them.
Mm-hmm.
I say that's a small piece of it because when you look at the average cost of a breach, what that's based on is, you got to remediate the problem immediately. The feds put you on a remediation plan and they check back in with you, right? Small practice in Utah a couple of years ago had a breach. Feds came in, said, okay, here's all the things you need to fix. We'll be back in a few months to check on it. They came back in a few months to check on it. They hadn't made any progress. They fined the practice a couple $100,000. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but for most small practices, that's enough to put them under,
Sure.
right? And it was for one incident that seemed relatively small. So you've got fines and penalties from the feds. You've got remediation efforts. You have the cost of losing patients, right? Because on average, when a practice has a breach, they lose 4% of their patients. So you have the cost of losing those patients and replacing that revenue. You have the cost of finding patients to replace them. So in our experience and the research we've done for a small to mid-sized practice, one breach can cost them $1 million just in lost patients and the cost of replacing those patients, not including any of those other pieces, right? Then you've got to notify the media. You've got to put it on your website. You have to pay for credit counseling services for all those patients. So that's why, we talk about $400 to $500 per record that it costs you in penalties, whether they're self-inflicted or inflicted by the government.
Yeah, it's just the world we live in. I mean, it sucks that healthcare practitioners are getting attacked like this, but with crypto and then COVID, man, it just seemed like it just like fanned the flames of cybercrime and everything. And now they're going after, I guess, the big dollars. I don't want to get into the benefits of what they're getting out of doing this horrible stuff, but it's the world we live in right now. So we got to be extra tight, tighten up, all the trap doors and cracks in the windows and everything, right? So now I think we've hopefully, let people know that this is something they need to be paying attention to and something that they need to be focusing on. Again, 83% of healthcare practitioners or healthcare practices, of all, I assume that's industry wide, all different ones that fall under that umbrella. 83% are not currently HIPAA compliant. So the odds are, if you're listening to this, you're not HIPAA compliant. So let's help some people out. And again, we're not going to be able to solve everything right now, but let's at least start pointing people in the right direction. So let's just start at, some low-hanging fruit. What are some immediate things organizations can do right now? And if possible, walk us through the steps starting at the top and then get down to, and here's how you become creme de la creme HIPAA compliant.
Sure. Well, let's start with, if you were to get audited today by the Office of Civil Rights, first thing they're going to ask for is a copy of your most recent risk assessment.
Okay.
And our studies show that 2/3 of the industry has never had a risk assessment. So that's
Where does
first
one
and
go?
foremost.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that's first and foremost is you got to have one, right? Because
And where does one to go get a risk assessment again? Obviously, company like yours, ours, but let's, they have an IT department, or they're like, do you just Google risk assessment? Like, where does one go find? How do I make sure I have a proper risk assessment done? Who do they talk to? What do they do if they don't have one? Let's really help people out here.
Sure. So I'll start with the fact that the federal government, the Office of Civil Rights, has a tool, right? It's called a GRC tool, Governance, Risk, and Compliance tool,
Okay.
for performing your own assessment.
Okay.
And it's free.
Okay.
And it walks you through the process.
All right.
So that's one place you can start, that a lot of people will start to investigate that situation. I'll put in a caveat, right? We have, I do business with a gentleman who sat on the Office of Civil Rights investigation team and investigated HIPAA breaches. And he said, here's what I would caution you. A tool like that, right? The free one from them, or there's some tools out there on the market, you can look up GRC tools. He said, if that's all you ever do, that's not enough, but it's a good place to start.
Perfect. Perfect.
He said, what I would encourage you to do is you also need to have a third-party risk assessment done at some point, right? Because you need somebody from the outside looking in. And that can be done at multiple different levels, right? On the high end, companies like Deloitte do that for big hospital systems, right? Deloitte, Accenture, and PwC. On the low end, it's a little more challenging. What we see oftentimes is IT firms that are helping provide that. And oftentimes they're using third-party tools to do that. But you really need a security risk analysis, which is looking at the security. Here's the thing. We're tasked with, in the healthcare industry, protecting the confidentiality the integrity, and the availability of patient records, right? And when we switched to electronic medical records about 12 years ago, right, in the meaningful use program, it went from, hey, I've got to protect these file cabinets full of patient records and how we treat those records, to now I have to protect these digital assets, right?
Mhm.
So now I'm looking at my IT network. I'm looking at how what's set up on my laptop. I look at the firewall in the facility, right? And the security practices of the facility. So again, I would talk to your IT service provider if you have one. I would talk to your IT department if you have one. And then you can go online and Google security risk analysis for healthcare.
All right,
And there are
awesome.
providers out there that can help.
You really touch from the tiny to the large, and I really appreciate that. Because we're here to offer solutions with people who have just literally, they're just paying to get by every month. We've all been there. So you don't have any money, you don't have any, like, what can I do without any money? Now, other people are like, I have more money than time. What do I do? How do I do this? Right. So please keep with that, because I really, I have, want to help anybody and everybody. And I appreciate everybody has a different journey that they're on, or a different stage that they're at of their journey. What's next? Security risk assessment.
All right, so first thing they're going to ask for is security risk analysis. Second thing they're going to ask for is, I need a copy of all your documented policies and procedures.
Okay.
Right. If you look at the laws of HIPAA, right, there's HIPAA security rule, HIPAA privacy rule, and HIPAA breach notification rule are the three biggies. There's approximately 178 different policy components that need to be in place. So that's going to be the next one, right? And you can go online and buy policy templates for a reasonable price, and go write them yourselves. I talked to a small hospital, rural hospital in Texas, to their CEO, and he said, I just bought some templates and I set aside 2 weeks and I spent those 80 hours and I just wrote them all for us.
Wow.
Most healthcare professionals I talk to don't have a spare 80 hours spread out over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of different ways to go about that. I would suggest you start with templates, right? Because again, you can buy them reasonably cheap. High end, really, what people that have the money for it can buy policy management systems, right? That cost anywhere from $5 to $10 to $50,000 a year to manage all of those policies and update them and train their staff on them and so on. But again, for a few $100s, you can go buy policy templates and you can start to implement that yourselves throughout the practice. But, again, you've got to have them documented. They have to be current with the laws. Your staff is supposed to review them on a regular basis, and you can define that lots of different ways. The industry standard is once a year, or anytime there's a significant change, but that's a big deal, right? So we go risk assessment, risk analysis, policy templates. Third one is having a training program in place, right? And the law says you have to train your staff every year on HIPAA. Every state can add their own things on top of that. So for instance, in Texas, the law says not only do you have to train your staff on HIPAA once a year, but you have to train them within 90 days of hire, right? That's a stipulation Texas added. In addition to that, the law says you have to train your staff with security reminders on a regular basis.
Okay.
We encourage folks to do that at least monthly. And that's things like, right? Imagine typical security reminders. It's things like for phishing, right? What do I need to look for in an email that might tell me, right? That might indicate this is a phishing email. It's things like, what are good security practices, right? Like not sharing your password with anyone, like putting a screen protector on my laptop so somebody sitting next to me at the coffee shop can't see the, information that I have on screen. Those types of things that we need to regularly be reminding staff about.
So let me ask this again. Direct people, if they have more time than money versus people who have more money than time, how they would take care of this step 3?
So some of our customers who are smaller will actually find some information online. There are free resources you can find through the Office of Civil Rights, right? Just like if you're in the manufacturing industry, OSHA has free training resources you can use. Office of Civil Rights, if you look up HIPAA and training, there are
Okay.
free resources out there that you
Mm-hmm.
can hold a class with your staff,
Mm-hmm.
right? And do that a couple times a year. There are also training programs that you can buy online, right? So you can, if you Google HIPAA training, there's hundreds of companies out there that provide them at various different price points, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
do a one-to-many in a class and you all sit and watch it. There's self-paced programs out there. But really would encourage you to get that HIPAA training, right? And when we train folks, we typically train them around privacy separately, because that's what this is all about, right? Is privacy. And then security and breach is really, security is how do I prevent a breach from happening? And breach notification is what do I do if a breach occurs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And depending on your role in the organization, you really need training around all those things and how you touch data and how the organization protects data. And
Mm-hmm.
each organization, right? There's generic, right? Here's HIPAA privacy and what the privacy rule says. Here's HIPAA security and what the security rule says and how you go about that. And here's the breach notification rule and what you do in a breach. But your organization has to have their own way of doing things that are unique to how you're organized, right? And so if you have multiple facilities, that changes it, right? Depending on how your structure is. If you're a doctor or a nurse or an administrator, right, it changes. If you're in a call center helping people over the phone, it changes. So there's some, start with the
There's
basics.
nuances there. You gotta know what you're doing. But I assume if you have more time than money, you most likely have a smaller staff. So even though this sounds daunting, you can do it. If you are bigger, I promise you, your IT firm, your internal IT, and or if you partner with an outside firm, they know about this stuff. At least they should. I would say they do. If
The biggest
they've been in
thing,
business
Dave,
for a little bit, they know what to do and they have training. And in fact, they do their own. At least we do. When it comes to training, we do those outside fake phishing campaigns. I know you do. We do the same.
right.
With you as well. So it all can be done. So I know this sounds daunting, everybody, but it's necessary. And it's not only necessary not to get popped, it's to renew your insurance, because this last part, I've now heard it, I don't know, a lot. That no, it's not about getting a better rate, it's about getting insurance, period. And if you can't prove that people are trained up, you ain't going to get your insurance. And how can you be in business in healthcare without insurance? So again, I don't mean to strike the fear of anybody. I'm really here to help, but these are the truth. These are the facts. This is what's happening right now. All right. Is there a step 4?
Well, again, we started with risk assessment, right? Because everything builds from that. If you don't know where the problems are, you can't put solutions in place. Then we went to policies and procedures, and so much centers around policies and procedures, right? Where you have, these are the standards we're going to conform to, and then training people on it. Those are really the big ones. But I would say, the next step to that is how do you implement that, right? If you look at the risk management process, it's identify issues, it's analyze what you found, it's take action on those, and then it's monitor going forward. And then you want to kind of step and repeat. And so
Gotcha.
that's kind of the overall process that we follow.
Understood. And I'll go ahead and give you a plug. You do have a software that helps with this as well, correct? That helps do all those things as well. But we are not here to sell it to anybody. We are here to educate. But if you do need, help with anything, IT, we're an IT partner. Randy is as a compliant expert, specifically with healthcare. But again, you can do this on your own. You might have to do it on your own if you have again, you have more time than money, but you need to do these things. Well, I think that's pretty much a wrap. As much research that I did into this and everything I've been hearing, I still learn a lot today. So appreciate you, Randy. Appreciate your time. Do you have any parting thoughts for anybody out there?
Well, I think to your point, Dave, it's important to take the first step, right? And as overwhelming as it can sound, You got to break it down into those
Get
bite-sized
that
chunks, right?
first step done.
Right? Do an analysis, even if it's go get the free tool from the federal government and walk through those steps,
Do that.
do it, right?
Do it today.
And take those steps, and then one step at a time, talk to a friend who's done it, talk to a company, ask for help, do some research out there, but you got to take that first step.
Appreciate it, man. Well, I really hope we help at least one person out there save from this, because it's the waves coming. All the research that I did was like, oh my God, I didn't realize how much they're cracking down, but it makes sense. It's insurance, it's money, follow the money, and it is what it is. But all right. Well, I appreciate your time, Randy, and on to the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.